All right, now I think we're going to get on with the presentation. So we have Susan Richmond is the Executive Director of Neighborhood Cats, having served in the role since 2010. She oversees hands-on TNR programs in New York City, Jersey City, and on the island of Maui, as well as her prior Madison Avenue advertising experience. To write, among other things, crowdfunding appeals to help the many sick and injured cats who come Neighborhood Cats' way. One of her favorite projects currently is a veterinary scholarship program designed to train community cat-oriented vets on high-volume spay-neuter techniques. When she's not in the office, you can find Susie out in the fields of Maui, where she recently passed the 1,000 cats trap mark. Brian Cordes serves as Neighborhood Cats National Program Director and Susie Richmond's husband. Back in 1999, while working in Manhattan as both an attorney and a video director, Brian co-founded Neighborhood Cats after TNRing a colony near where he lived. Except for a 6-year stint as a grants manager for PetSmart Charities, he has been with the organization ever since. He's authored or co-authored handbooks on grassroots TNR, community TNR, and return to field programs. You can always find him online, where he regularly presents both basic and advanced webinars on all things Trap-Neuter-Return in partnership with the Community Cats podcast. And I'm going to hand it over to Brian. Thank y'all.
Okay, thank you, Stacy, and thanks everybody for taking time out today to learn more about taking care of our community cats. I want to point out that one of the handouts, there should be a handout section in your control panel. And if you don't have, sometimes it doesn't show up, in which case just email Stacy and she'll send you the handouts. But one of them is a copy of all the slides that you're going to see this afternoon or morning, depending on where you are. And so you don't have to be madly taking notes. Just download that handout, and all the links in it are live. You'll see lots of different products and things that we'll mention today with links to where you can buy them. Also, you'll notice one of the handouts is the Neighborhood Cats TNR Handbook. If you want to take a deeper dive into something we're talking about today, have a look at that as a kind of a reference material. Okay, so let's get into our topic. And when we talk about caretaking for community cats, I think the most important thing to recognize up front is that the bond between the cats and the caretaker is centered around food. Not that they don't love you, not that there aren't other aspects to the relationship, but that tends to be the central thing that joins us together. People come across cats who are in need, and usually they're in need of food. Regular feeding starts to happen, and the bond between the cats and the person starts to form, and then you know that they're there waiting for you each night as part of your routine. So that's what we're going to spend the first part of our webinar today is really diving into the feeding and the bond that results from that. So one of the first thing I want to say is, now everything here is not like you should do it this way, you have to do it this way. We're trying to point out like what's ideal, what should you strive for, what should you do if you can do it. Not all circumstances will allow for everything that we're presenting, and you'll see we'll discuss different options and different approaches. But if you can feed your cats on a regular pattern, then that's going to be the way to go for a number of reasons we'll talk about. So cats, are very habitual creatures. If you've got cats at home, then if normally you're feeding them at 7 in the morning, well, good luck on the weekend sleeping in until 9, because if they can get into your bedroom, they are not going to allow that to happen. They will do whatever they can to get you out of bed so that they will eat at their normal time. And cats outside are just the same. So they can be pretty easily trained to show up at the same time and the same place for their meals. And so if you can't, the more specific you can be, the better. So like I said, with your pet cats, you're always feeding them at 7. With your community cats, maybe you're always feeding them at 9 or when you get home from work or whatever it might be. If you can't be like, oh, hey, it's 5 p.m. and I'm feeding them, then you want to at least narrow the window as much as you can. So always feed them in the morning or always feed them after dusk. But don't sometimes feed them one time and sometimes feed them at another part of the day. And you also want to avoid 24/7 feeding, meaning food is always out. Again, if you can avoid that. Now, one tip is you can clicker train or use some unique sound that the cats associate with the feeding. A lot of them will figure it out themselves. Like they actually can recognize the sound of an engine of a specific car. And when they hear that car pulling up, they come out of the bushes and know that it's you. But you can also jingle your keys or shake a jar of crunchies or whistle, whatever it might be. And the reason you want to do that and the reason you want a feeding pattern in general is it makes trapping and it makes caretaking much more predictable and therefore much easier. In terms of trapping, if you've got a colony of 15 cats and they're in one neighborhood, or maybe they're at an industrial area, think about you want to get them spayed and neutered. And if they're not on any type of feeding pattern, then how are you going to go about trapping them? Well, you're going to show up at a time of day, maybe that's convenient for you, and you're going to spread traps all over the place, and you're going to hope they're hungry, and you're going to hope they show up. That's not the greatest way to go about it. A better way is they're going to be there at 5, and you know exactly where they're all going to be because they're going to come and gather for their meal, and then you're putting traps in that location at that time. And by the way, the day before you didn't feed them. So now they're really hungry. That's a much, much better trapping situation. Also, having a feeding pattern allows you to monitor the colony. Is there a newcomer? Like we just had a new kitten show up in the back of our building. And not going to be that hard. We know that after dusk, when the feeding usually happens, this kitten's going to show up. And so that's when we're going to put out our drop trap and catch her. We'll set up a half hour before, and we'll just wait, put a big bowl of food in the trap, and wait for her to show up. So makes monitoring, trapping, everything to do better. The other thing is with a feeding pattern, you can control a lot of the issues that come up with community cats. So you can train them that the food is out at 5 p.m. and the food is gone at 5:30, and they will eat their meal and they'll go on their way. So unless you're somebody like who feeds your cat, who leaves a big bowl of dry food out all day for your pet cats, which is not a particularly good idea in terms of health, because cats are what are called feast or famine animals. You think about a cat in the wild, and they don't nibble and graze all day like a cow might. They hunt, they kill, they gorge themselves, and then they may not eat for another 2 or 3 days. So their digestive systems are set up for that, and their digestive systems are triggered by the scent of food. And if food is around all the time, then their digestive systems are always going, and that can lead to kidney disease and different chronic ailments. So in general, when you can feed your cats in discrete time frames, that's going to be healthier for them. And we're probably talking canned food at that point if you're doing maybe some dry. But basically, if you are feeding your community cats and they're, they've eaten and they're done, everything, and you can clean up at 5:30 when you fed them at 5, you're going to avoid a lot of conflicts with neighbors complaining about food being left out or unsightliness or attracting rodents and things like that. Now, again, this is, I completely understand there are situations where you cannot do that, and you have to leave food out. And we'll talk about how you handle those too. So by training them to eat in this window of time, you're also avoiding attracting wildlife, which can be really a big issue in a lot of communities. And like I say, you're not attracting rodents who are coming by to eat whatever food may be around once the cats are done, or because they know there's always a food source there. So like you see this guy here, this little raccoon who's going to come around and potentially cause issues again with public health, with neighbors and things like that. Now let's say you are in an area where there are raccoons or other animals and they show up too, right? They're smart. They know, they learn when the window of food is too. Or let's say you're in a situation where you have to leave the food and then come back the next day. You can't hang out. If you're feeding 3 colonies and 50 cats, in the course of the evening, you put the food out and you have to go move on to your next situation. Well, here's a trick for you when you're dealing with opossums or raccoons or skunks or any type of wildlife that may be interested in the cat food. And this is what's called a raccoon-proof feeder. And it's for animals who can climb, like, if you've ever seen the claws on a raccoon, they're pretty amazing. But they can't jump vertically. They can actually jump horizontally, but they can't jump up. So this feeder creates a platform. You're up on a platform, and then it's surrounded by this metal flashing that the animals can't grab onto, so they can't climb up it. Meanwhile, cats can jump vertically. So you can see on the lower right of this photo, little what's called jumping station. So the cats get up on that, and then they jump up onto the platform, and they get their food. So just one way to deal with this if you have to. And the plans, more details on building one of these, if you click on the link there for Forgotten Felines of Forsyth, you'll get more detail on how to build one. So what if your problem isn't mammals? Well, I don't know if it's a bird or mammal, but let's say it's not raccoons, it's birds. So there's a number of ways to deal with birds getting into the food. Most birds, almost all birds, are diurnal, meaning that they're active during the day and they sleep at night. We have that situation here in Hawaii where there's lots of feral chickens, and the chickens have no fear of the cats. In fact, it's quite the opposite. The cats will back off when the chickens approach. And they're voracious eaters, and but they're only out during the day, and when it gets dark, they go up into a tree and they hang out and sleep there all night. So most of the feeding of community cats in Hawaii is right after dark. Now, if you have to put food out during the daytime, one idea is what you see in this slide, which is you have a feeding station, meaning a contained area where you put the food and water in. We'll talk more about that. But cover the doorway with these strips of plastic like you see here, because the cats won't have any problem sticking their head in or walking right through that. But the vast majority of birds will not want to pass through those strips. Another idea is we've often done, especially like we've done this when we're trapping and there are birds around, we feed the birds separately. Like you feed them a food that they like and the cats don't. So like cracked corn or chicken scratch, and put a pile of it away from where the cats are eating, and the birds will run over and eat that food instead. So let's talk about nutrition a little bit, because obviously that's an important thing. But first thing you need to know is how do you know how do you judge the nutritious content of a cat food, of a particular can or bag of dry food? So this is a very simple approach, and it does get a lot more complicated. But so I'm talking about really generalities here, but it's a good place to start. So the first thing you're going to do is you're going to look at the ingredients, the list of ingredients, and that you see circled in red in the photo here. And those ingredients are going to be listed in the order of volume. So whatever ingredient is the most in the food is going to be listed first. So in this case, you see beef, and then second would be beef broth, and then third would be chicken liver, and fourth would be kidney. You don't get to something that's non-meat. Remember, cats are carnivores, so they need meat until you get to rice flour. So that compare that to, you look at a food and the first ingredient is cornmeal, right? So cats really don't get much nutrition from corn. So most of that, the largest ingredient in the food, is not something that's particularly nutritious for them. So that's a good rule of thumb, is look at the ingredient label for those things. Grains, if you see the term byproducts, like if it says chicken byproducts, you're thinking, what is that, right? Well, that's feathers and hooves and the parts of the animal that normally, like, you wouldn't ever have for human consumption, but they just kind of throw it in. And basically, it's a pretty direct relationship when it comes to pet food in general, that you get what you pay for. So more nutritious foods tend to be more expensive. And that's something we'll talk about. How do you balance that? And again, I'm not telling you you should go out and buy the most expensive, most nutritious food. That's not practical for a lot of caretakers. But this is about you knowing what you're feeding and then making decisions intelligently based within your means. Now, if you want to learn more, like I say, it's complicated because so would, the one brand, what's the quality of the meat that goes into it? What are some, you can do a much deeper dive than I just did. And like I say, there are books and websites devoted to this. So there's a few links on this slide if you're interested in learning more about cat nutrition. But those are the basics. So one of the debates that comes up when we talk about cat nutrition is wet food versus dry food. And I like to make it very simple for people about, and again, we're just talking about nutrition. We're not talking about what you're going to be feeding your community cats, but just so you know, you have the information. You look at this slide and you've got a piece of meat on your left that is wet food, right? It's not. And then you have that same piece of meat on your right that's been baked to a crisp, and that would be dry food. Now, if you, I mean, I'm vegan, so this is slide's a little hard for me, but or I don't relate to it so well. But if you were going to go out and order a steak, which would you rather have? The steak that is juicy and so-called wet, or would you like to have the charred piece of meat on your right? So obviously, you're going to choose the wet food, and that's what dry food versus wet food comes down to. It's dry food is meat that's been baked to a crisp. Now, let me add one thing about the dry food too, just a nutrition tip, is again, you get what you pay for. So the cheaper dry foods, they add, you'll see they'll say like, well, there's all these added vitamins and things like that. The cheaper ones add them at the beginning before the baking process because it's faster and easier that way. So guess what? A lot of those vitamins get destroyed during the baking process. The more expensive dry foods will bake the meat and then add the vitamins so that they're not, burnt to a crisp. So that's why some dry foods are more expensive than others, is the process by which they make them. So now that you have a basic understanding of nutrition, we come down to what are you going to do uh, when you're feeding your community cats? How do you decide? And the formula that we recommend to people is that you choose the best quality and type, wet or dry, that you can comfortably afford. So there are two equally important things going on here. I really want to emphasize that. There's nutrition is important, right? The more nutritious, the healthier, the better chance the cats have of being healthy. But your pocketbook is just as important. And so how you strike this balance is going to depend on your circumstances, right? So if you're feeding 4 cats in your backyard and you have a nice comfortable income and plenty of disposable income to spend, and you can afford to give them high quality canned food on a daily basis, go for it. They'll be better off for it. On the other hand, if you're one of those 18% of people today who's feeding more than 20 cats and you're on a fixed income and you don't have a lot of disposable income, you're basically scraping by right now and hopefully not sacrificing your own well-being, but it's tough for you to get the cats the food they need. Then you're going to want to buy dry food because you can get a lot more of it at a much more effective price, a lower price per serving than if you're going out and buying canned food. You can also remember that you can mix a bit. If you're giving mostly dry food, then maybe some canned food once in a while. Even the the supermarket brands that are a little less expensive is a good thing to do. So keep that in mind. That's it. You are important too, and we don't want people struggling financially in order to feed the cats. So we also put a list here. Here's a few brands of dry food that, in our experience, have a really good balance between value and nutrition. So they're not the cheapest. They're not the the deli cat or meow mix type of rainbow colored food that's the cheapest, but they're not that expensive and they're relatively good nutrition. And you'll see the first on the list there is Kirkland, and Kirkland is Costco's store brand. So it's a very good reason to get a Costco card if you don't have one and you're feeding a lot of cats, because you can go get a 25-pound bag of Kirkland Signature for a very good price and really feed a lot of cats that way. And then also Rachel Ray Nutrish and Diamond Naturals are a nice balance between cost and nutrition. Okay, so let's talk about where to feed now that we've talked about what to feed. And our approach at Neighborhood Cats has always been, out of sight, out of mind. My first experience taking care of a colony of cats, there was a period of time, and this kitty was one of that colony from over 20 years ago. I had to feed through a fence for a while that was adjoining a sidewalk, and this is the Upper West Side of Manhattan. So a lot of people walking by, a lot of people saw the cat food dish, and every year, 1 or 2 cats, would be dumped at that location. When I finally got the trust of the landlord and he let me go into the lot, I immediately went, and as you can see here, I hid the food and the water behind a bunch of rocks further into the lot so people couldn't see the food and the water. And then I had almost, I think maybe 1 in years, cat abandoned there. So also just, again, fewer complaints, the less interest people have who are not caring for the cats, in my experience, the better. You want the cats to be a neutral factor, or a positive one, of course. So think about where you would have minimal impact on neighbors or the work site. You want it to be safe and quiet for the cats. It has to be accessible for you. Don't pick a great spot for a feeding station that you can't get to. It won't really do much good. If you're in a location where there's wildlife, especially any that are threatened by cats, ground nesting birds, things like that, try to situate your feeding stations as far away from the wildlife and especially their nesting areas as you can, to avoid conflict. You want to avoid what you see here in this slide, which is putting the food directly on the pavement or the ground. This is one of my pet peeves, because guess what happens if they don't eat it all, right? It just stays there, and that's going to be a source of complaints. It's going to attract rodents. It's going to attract wildlife, and just really not a good idea. You want to avoid that. So whenever you're feeding, try to put the food on something that you can then pick up when they're done. So plastic plates, cardboard, things like that. Best except are stainless steel bowls or dishes. The stainless steel bowls, and anything stainless steel, is going to help prevent feline acne when the cat's chins rub against it. What happens with plastic is over time they get little microscopic chips or scratches or things like that, and then bacteria collect there, and then the cats rub their chins against them, and they get feline acne, whereas that doesn't happen with stainless steel. The only thing about stainless steel is bowls is if you're in a cold climate in the wintertime, you don't want to use them at that time, because if it gets below freezing, you don't want your cat's tongues getting stuck to metal or anything like that. And that is a real thing that can happen. Also think about if you're going to be there for the whole time, and when the feeding ends, then you're going to pick up your plates and clean the place up. But if you're in a situation where you can't stick around, then you want to make sure you're using containers that aren't going to blow around and make a mess everywhere. And you're probably going to want a feeding station, which we'll talk about in a moment. So the number one complaint against community cat caretakers and feeders is that it's a mess. And here's a good example of, probably this isn't a situation where the people who work here or neighbors are going to be really pleased with their cat feeding neighbors, because look at what a total mess it is, right? And it's not that hard to keep the site clean. So always keep that in mind. You want to as spotless as possible. And I know one of the things that I always did was I picked up all the trash that was in the area. I didn't say to myself, well, that's my trash. That's not my trash, so I'm going to leave it here. Because think about the person walking by. They're not saying, oh, well, the people feeding the cats are very neat. They're not a problem. It's somebody else who's making the place a mess. No, they just see a mess, and then they see cats, and then they associate the two together. So it's always better to keep the place clean, and don't try to classify trash as belonging to you or not. It's just trash. Don't leave bags of trash or any kind of container that the cats can open or rip open that has any scent of food inside, because they will. If you leave a bag of trash in a garbage bag that has some leftover food or an empty can, the cats will rip it open and of course make quite a mess. And then the bags can be a threat to wildlife who get caught in it or get it wrapped around them or get stuck inside it. So don't, if you're going to have trash on the site, it should be in a trash can or some type of container that the cats can't get into. Obviously in general, it's better just take it away and throw it out somewhere else. So let's talk about gravity feeders. So these are great for situations where you cannot be there at the beginning and the end of the feeding, and where maybe you do have to leave food out for 24/7. Sometimes maybe you're away for the weekend. Whatever, there are going to be circumstances where these gravity feeders are very useful. So a couple of tips, and they're called gravity feeders because you put the food in and the gravity, as the food is eaten, gravity forces what's in the big container to come down into the bowl. So one tip is use the smallest feeder that you need. So if you've got 2 or 3 cats, you don't need a 20-pound, a gravity feeder that can hold 20 pounds of dry food. You just need one that can hold maybe 3 pounds or 6 pounds. It will keep the food fresher. Again, it will attract less wildlife and things like that. And they're just easier to manage. You want to always remember, especially if you're feeding a lot of dry food, you need to have water as well. And just like there are gravity feeders, there are what are called auto waterers that work on exactly the same principle. You fill it up and gravity causes it to come down and fill the bowl. And there especially, you don't want to get larger than you need, because if you get a 3-gallon auto waterer, that's quite a piece of equipment to lug around and to fill up, and stick to the 1 gallon and things like 1 gallon of water for should take care of many cats for several days, but do change the water every few days to keep it fresh. So we've mentioned feeding stations, and I think these are good ideas, especially you may not need a feeding station if you're doing the feeding pattern, right? So you're coming, the cats are all showing up, you're putting down stainless steel bowls, you're putting out their food, they're eating it all, they're done in half an hour, you gather it all up and you go home. Well, you probably don't need a feeding station, but you may still want one for the water. And if you're not doing the feeding pattern, or you're not doing it all the time, and you need to leave a gravity feeder with dry food, or a big pan of dry food, whatever it might be, behind, it's much better to have them in a container of some sort. It's much neater. It protects the food and the water from the elements. So what you see here in this slide is a very common feeding station. It's made out of a storage, a regular storage bin. You want to get Sterilite is a good brand. Rubberneck is a good brand. Tougher ones that will withstand being outdoors in the weather. If you can get them with clamp-on lids, like you see in this slide, you see how the handles clamp on at the top. That will help keep the lid on in the wind. If not, you want to maybe put a couple of bricks on top of the feeding station to keep it in place. Probably the biggest tip to take away from this is the opening of the feeding station should be pretty large, like what you see here, because you don't want the dominant cat in the colony to enter through a small opening and then decide, I'm going to hang out in here and keep everybody else out. So they can't do that if you have a big opening, or if you have a couple of smaller openings. So there's more than one way in or out. Here's some other ideas for feeding stations. As you can see on the upper left there, you can take a trash can, a rubber-made trash can, put it on its side, maybe use a couple of cinder blocks to hold it in place, and boom, you've got a great feeding station. Any size storage bin from 18 to 55 gallon can be turned into one. You can do it yourself, make one out of plywood. And for those who really don't want to deal with making your own, you can order a small or a large one from a company called Ferrovia. And the link is there, ferrovia.com. And they'll send it to you, and you'll just need a screwdriver to put it together. And they're they're extremely well made. They're worth the money if that's the route you want to go. Also want to introduce one other idea to you. This is something that we learned at Neighborhood Cats. We were responsible for, after the wildfire in Maui about a year ago, it burnt down the town of Lahaina. So Neighborhood Cats was in charge of coordinating the rescue of what turned out to be over 600 cats who were in the burn zone. And one of the ways we did this is we turned drop traps like you see here into feeding stations. And we taught the cats to eat inside the drop traps. And then when we wanted to catch them, we put the side door on and used a remote control, or you can use a string. And we caught them when they were inside the drop traps eating. So think about that, especially if you're at the beginning of working with a colony and you have a situation where you can leave a drop trap out. Notice that we put a roof on. That's very important for this to be an effective feeding station. It has to have a roof. We use corrugated plastic that you can buy sheets of at Home Depot or Lowe's, and then zip tied it onto the top of the drop trap. And really, what we found was the cats loved this space. They had no problem going into it. Sometimes we had cats who just like to hang out in there. It became like a big play space for them. And it only took generally like maybe 3 days to train them to go all the way into the back and eat there. So that's what you're doing. Like what you're seeing in this slide is Kitty is at the beginning of being trained to eat inside one of these. So the dish of food is at the front, just has to stick his head in. Then we're going to move it to the middle. And then when he's eating in the middle, we're going to move the pan all the way to the back. Now, if you're wondering, well, how do I use the side door to, I'm not familiar with that technique with a drop trap. Most people are used to the drop trap, being propped up in front and pulling a string. They're not that familiar with using the side door instead. So we have a free webinar in partnership with the Community Cats podcast on the drop trap. And in that webinar, it goes over all things drop trap, but we do discuss side door trapping and how to do that. So that's the link if you're interested in that webinar. Another idea for you, we're getting into a little more esoteric, but still we like to be creative here. If you're, you can get one of these mock rocks, like you see in the picture, and get a jigsaw and make sure you have the correct blade. Talk to the guy at Home Depot and say, what kind of blade do I need to cut, fiberglass or resin or whatever it is. I think you need a fine metal blade, but check with them. Anyway, then you can use the jigsaw to cut a doorway for the cats to get into one of these. And you can just blend your feeding station right into the landscape. Now these, if you order one, they're not cheap. I mean, I think the one you're looking at is probably, I'm going to guess that's probably about $150. But again, if you can afford it and it works for you, great. And they come larger than that too. And there's a link here. The Pond Guy, that website has a number of different sizes and shapes. But you can also do it yourself. Go onto YouTube and do a search for make a fake hollow rock, and you'll come up with a whole bunch of videos on how to make your own, which is obviously going to be a lot cheaper. Some other tips for you. Let's say it's you don't have a feeding station and it's raining, and so the cats are not coming out, and this is the time, and you have to put the food down and get on your way. You can take a bowl like you see here. This is a takeout dish from a takeout restaurant, and you fill it with dry food, and then you take the lid and you turn it upside down. So the lid will protect the dry food from the rain, And when the rain stops, the cats will come out, they'll smell the food, and they'll just easily push the lid off the top of the bowl. And there you go. If you want to store dry food on site, so you're not, if you're able to do that, safely, so that it stays there, you can use what's called Vittles vaults. And these are what you see here, these containers that really do keep the dry food quite fresh. So you can fill that up and keep it there. We suggest that you don't leave the Vittle vault out in the open, but put it in a storage bin. So it's a little more discreet and a little more protected. Another good tip for those of you who are feeding in awkward places, like through fences and stuff like that, an arm extender can be very handy. It's just a $10 item you can get on Amazon. But for example, when I had to feed through a fence, I would use an arm extender, and I would push the food and push the water so that it was out of arm's reach of the sidewalk, so people could see it, but they couldn't reach it, which was just made it a little bit safer. We're coming up on the winter time in North America, so it's going to start getting colder in a lot of parts of the country. So keep in mind that cats expend more calories in colder temperatures. They need to move around more. So they need an average, the research shows, of about 15% more food. So you want to up the quantity of food that you're giving them just a little bit more. And like I said before, avoid when you're getting near or below freezing temperatures, don't use metal bowls unless they're heated, because they can get their tongue stuck on them. It doesn't happen often, but it just has to happen once. If you ever do get a cat that has is stuck on something metal, you want to pour warm water over them, over their tongue, and over whatever the metal object is that will melt basically the ice that has formed that's getting them stuck. So water in wintertime, healthy cats need some water. They don't need a lot of it, but they do need some on a daily basis. And if your main source of food is dry food, which it often is going to be in cold weather, it's really important to have a regular water source. So one thing you can do is, if you got the cats on a feeding pattern, you can, at the beginning of your meal, even if it's very cold temperatures, you can give them a little bit of wet food with some water mixed in, maybe a little bit of warm water mixed into it, and so they can eat that right away and get their moisture content, like so. But if you still want to be able to leave water out, and there are ways to either stop water from freezing or at least slow it down significantly. And here's a few ideas for you. So there's something called a solar sipper, and it basically captures the heat of the sun and stores it so that it will keep the water from freezing down to about 20 degrees Fahrenheit. And you can get them at the link you see here. There's also a product called a Snuggle Safe, and that's designed for pet cats, to have something warm to sleep on. But you can also stick it in your microwave, heat it up, and it stays warm for quite a while, and then stick it under the water bowl at the colony site, and it will keep the water from freezing for at least some period of time, sometimes a few hours, sometimes less, but still it will slow down the freezing. And then if it's your backyard colony and you've got an outlet, you can use an electric heated water bowl and completely prevent freezing from happening. The only word of warning with electric heated bowls is make sure you get a big one. So you see the one in this slide is 1.5 gallons. And you may be thinking, why do I have to put 1.5 gallons out for my 3 cats? And that's because the water will evaporate much faster than normal because it's going to be much warmer than the surrounding air. So it doesn't evaporate all the way. You need a lot of it in there. And so, you know, get a big one. Don't get a little electric water bowl. Here's some more do-it-yourself, easier or less expensive ideas. Just the kind of bowl you use to put your water in is going to have a big effect on how long it takes to freeze. So the deeper the bowl and the wider the bowl and the thicker the plastic, so the more insulation, the slower the freezing process will take. So there's an example on the slide here where you can see it's wide, it's relatively deep, and the cats can easily get to it. So the larger the surface of the water and the deeper the water goes, the slower it's going to freeze. You can also put your water bowl, if you want to combine a couple of things, get one of these, you got to remember this to do this in the summertime when these styrofoam coolers are available. You know, people take them to the beach and they put their soda and their beer in them or whatever it is. Buy one of those. So, you know, they're relatively inexpensive. Cut a doorway in one of the short sides and put your water bowl inside of this. So the bowl will slow the freezing and then the styrofoam will keep the air insulated and also slow down the freezing process. Another idea is go to your veterinarian, ask them for one of the styrofoam containers that vaccines are shipped to them in, like you see in the photo there. And what you're going to do is you're going to line the inside of that box with plastic, and then cut a little opening, a round opening on in the top, so that the cats can drink the water through the hole on top, and the styrofoam container will again significantly slow down the freezing process. If you got a lot of snow and you want to clear a path for your cats, that's always a good idea, especially when the snow is higher than they are. So rock salt and chemical de-icers, what are people typically use to de-ice sidewalks and things like that, they can be highly irritating and toxic to cats. So here's a safe solution. You know, get some Dawn dish detergent, some rubbing alcohol, mix it up with a half gallon of warm water, and then spray that or pour that on ice, and that will de-ice your path or your sidewalk, and it's completely safe for the cats. Let's talk about insects a little bit. Big problem that caretakers often have is ants getting into the food, and there's an easy way around that, which is just keep in mind that ants can't swim. Okay, so they can't cross water. You can go onto Amazon. If you do a search for ant-proof pet bowls, you'll get like 103 choices, and they all operate on that same principle, which is the food is in a bowl that has basically a moat of water around it. You can also just build your own, like you see in this slide, where we took a cookie pan and just a 1/4 inch, 1/2 inch of water, and put the bowl in the middle of the cookie pan, and ants will not be able to get into that, but the cats can easily lean over and eat their meals. Here's another idea that we developed again in the burn zone in Maui, where we did have to leave large quantities of dry food out for the cats, and there were tons of ants everywhere. So it's what we call a pan in a pan moat. So you start on the left there. You've got 1 liter pan, and put a couple of small food bowls in it. Fill it with, not fill it, but maybe an inch of water, and water in the bowls, and then take another similar size pan and put it on top of the bowls and inside the pan with the water. And that worked quite well to prevent any types of insects from crawling into the dry food. And this, of course, went inside of a storage bin feeding station. What about flies? They're tough, but there are some knowledge is power, right? So they're on a hot day, they're going to be much more attracted to wet food than they are to dry. So if you've got a real fly problem and it's a real hot day and you have to put food out in the middle of it, you're probably better off with dry food. The other trick is they sleep at night, the flies. So if you train the cats to eat at sundown, at least during the summertime, you'll be able to avoid issues with flies. Now for the caretaker who has everything and you're trying to find them a Christmas present, think about a wireless auto feeder. These things are really cool. You can program it on your smartphone. So it's like a gravity feeder, right? Where you fill up the container with the food, but you can then on your smartphone decide when the food comes out. And you can get one that has like 2 bowls like this if you have multiple cats. And you can I think I forget how many meals you can set it for, but quite a few. So you can decide when if you can't be there to put the food out at a specific time, you can use this device. Of course, it's a bit of a luxury, and you have to be able to put it in a place where somebody else isn't going to walk away with it, but just a fun idea for you to know about. Now, what about slugs? Also, slugs, snails, any kind of slimy, crawly animal that likes the food too. The trick to keep them out of the cat food is what's called diatomaceous earth. And diatomaceous earth is actually these microscopic size kind of shell marine type of animals, but they're literally microscopic. And the diatomaceous earth, even when you touch it with your hand, it's going to feel very smooth, like baby powder or something like that. But it's actually made up of zillions of sharp edges on the microscopic level. So if you take diatomaceous earth and you draw a circle with it around your food bowls, slugs and ants and any kind of animal is not going to cross that path because it will be too painful for them. So it's great. It's great stuff. You can also use crushed eggshells or chalk powder. Does same idea. Sheet of sandpaper. Two words of warning about diatomaceous earth. Number one, only get what's called food grade. You can see on the bag here how it's marked food grade, because there's another form that's called pool, P-O-O-L grade, that has a completely different purpose and is not safe for animals. But this is. So if they ingest it into their digestive system, actually it will just kill parasites and things like that, but it won't harm them. So only food grade. But the other thing is when you're spreading it out as a human, you don't want to be inhaling it, because remember, it's millions of microscopic sharp edges, and you don't want those in your lungs. And in fact, in extreme cases, people have died from from inhaling large amounts of diatomaceous earth because it ripped up their lungs. So either wear a dust mask or spread it in a way where it's not getting up in the air. We recommend, wear a dust mask and just be safe. Now, another thing you can do with slugs that I found is, if you put some food on the ground near, maybe a couple of feet away from the food bowl, they're smart. They'll go eat that. They don't want to have to make the effort of climbing up into the bowl if they don't have to. So cats, they could use a little help often in the wintertime with having a warm, dry place to bed down and to hang out. So it's really an important thing to make sure they have if you're in a cold climate. There are three qualities to any winter shelter that are going to make it effective. One, it's going to be waterproof. Number two, it's going to be well insulated. And number three, which is and well insulated, that means made of something that traps heat. So thick styrofoam is always a big favorite. The third thing, though, is minimal empty airspace. So the way these shelters work is the cats go in, the shelter traps their body heat, and then it keeps it in there. That's where the good insulation comes in. And their bodies actually are like little radiators that heat up the space. So the number of cats and the size of the shelter have to match so that there's not too much empty space. So for the cats to heat up. So if you have one cat in a shelter that can hold 6 of them, it's not going to be warm in there because the one cat's not going to generate enough body heat. On the other hand, if you had 5, 4, 5, 6 cats in there, they would all be very toasty. So make sure that your shelter is matching the number of its size of the shelter is matching the number of cats, and avoid things like dog houses, which are tall and have a lot of empty space above where the cats are lying. So most good winter shelters are not going to be much taller than like 12 inches, maybe 18 inches at the absolute most. There's a ton of creativity in the field about designing winter shelters, and we've collected a lot of that on our website at neighborhoodcats.org. So if you click on that link, it'll take you to our feral cat winter shelter page. What you're looking at in this slide is basically a 2-foot by 8-foot sheet of styrofoam insulation that's 2 inches thick. And using you need a table saw so you get good straight cuts, but you take that 2-foot by 8-foot sheet, cut it up, and then silicone glue it back together, and you've got this great shelter. And you can see, you can get really fancy with it. This is a shelter building workshop that we held, and you can see there's a linoleum tile on the floor, makes it easier to clean. This particular person put what is that? Some type of wallpaper on the insides, again, to make the walls scratch proof and easier to clean, although you really don't have to get that fancy. But anyway, it ends up being a nice shelter that can hold, up to 4 cats. I've even seen more, like 5 or 6 packed in there on a extremely cold night. But you can get the plans on our website, step by step, how to build one of these. Another idea that's simpler is styrofoam boxes. So there's a lot of especially food items, perishable food items, like Omaha Steaks ships their stuff in these big styrofoam boxes, and they're great. They're usually about 1.5 inches thick in terms of the thickness of the styrofoam. And you can basically do what you see in this slide. You just take the top of the box, and we recommend gluing it on to make sure that it's sealed and waterproof, but you glue the top on, and then you put a deck coat on it, of a deck paint that you use to blend the shelter into the surroundings. And take either a steak knife or a jigsaw, but you just need a steak knife really, or a box cutter. And you don't need a jigsaw. Styrofoam is very soft. And cut open about a 6 by 6 inch square door in one of the short sides. Stuff it with straw, and you got a great winter shelter. This size probably hold 1 or 2 cats. Another thing you can do is combine styrofoam with a storage bin. And what you see in this slide is a storage bin that has the walls loosely lined. The great thing about the storage bin is you don't have to cut the styrofoam so precisely. It can be loosely The walls can be loosely lined, as you see here, and this is a 1-inch styrofoam as opposed to a thicker one. Although you can use thicker if you want to, it just will take away more of the interior space, obviously. So the walls are lined with the styrofoam. There's a styrofoam roof that goes on top, and then the lid of the storage bin goes on top of that. And you cut open a door with a box cutter through the styrofoam and through the storage bin. Again, you want to keep the doors small. 6 inches by 6 inches should be plenty. We often get the question of, like, should there be 2 doors in a winter shelter so that, you know, if a coyote comes along or a predator or a raccoon or something like that, the cats are not trapped inside. And generally what we say is no, unless the threat of coyotes or other animals is really high, because the bigger risk is going to be the drafts that are created by having 2 openings. If they're not, even if you have flap doors over them, you could still get drafts, and there's more of a risk of the cats getting sick from cold drafts than they are of getting hunted by a coyote or something like that. On the other hand, if you are in an area where lots of coyotes, especially, or predators for cats, then you probably not a bad idea to have an escape hatch. We talk about flaps. Flaps are just something that you would put over the door, like a piece of vinyl, something that the cats that you can either tape or screw on over the doorway, and then the cats pull it back in order to enter the shelter. Those are great, but you want to make sure you don't have that. You add them after the cats are used to going in and out of the shelter, not beforehand, because you want them to know they want to get inside, and they'll figure out how to pull the flap back. But initially they might not. Also, to get the cats started, you might sprinkle a little bit of catnip inside and entice them in that way. The plans for this particular shelter you're looking at, again, are on our website. For those of you who would rather buy a pre-made one, I refer you to Feral Via again, and it's an excellent winter shelter, and I think this one has a design where they enter on the ground, but then the actual shelter is up. There's a little level where the shelter is up off the ground, the floor area. But you would order this, they would ship it to you, and you would, again, just need a screwdriver to put it together. Want to point out emergency winter shelter in case that's a situation you're in. There's a storm coming. You can make a great temporary shelter just out of cardboard boxes, and you put a box inside a box. You stuff the space between them with folded newspaper, and then you wrap the whole thing in plastic and secure it with duct tape, and you've got a cardboard shelter that will definitely help you to ride out the storm. Again, go to our website for the exact step-by-step plans. Where you place the shelters is how you place them can be important. A couple of things in this slide. One is, gee, don't you wish they had painted those shelters, right? Because they really stand out just left as the pink styrofoam, whereas, a coat of gray deck paint, they would have blended right in. But the point of this slide is, see how they've got the shelters facing each other? The front doors are facing each other, and then they have put pieces of plywood on top of the shelters to create like a porch, a protected like tunnel porch area. That's really handy in the wintertime, because you can put food and water in that space and it will be protected, and the cats don't have to travel anywhere. They just come out of their shelters, they eat, and they can go back in. The other point is also, if you're not feeding them that way, make sure the shelters are close to the feeding station so the cats don't have to travel a long way if you can do that. Now, inside the shelters, you can put what we call insulating materials, and that helps increase the warmth of the cats, like having a blanket in bed. The main thing to understand about this is that for it to be effective, for it to make the cats warmer and not colder, they have to be able to burrow into it. If they lie on top of it, it will draw body heat out. They need to be surrounded by it. So that's why straw is so great, because they can just burrow right under it. Don't confuse straw with hay. They're not the same thing. Hay is bad, straw is good. You can use shredded newspaper if you can't find straw. That's also something they can burrow into. But don't put flat newspaper on the floor. Don't put blankets or towels on the floor, because that makes them colder, not warmer. The exception would be the purr pads that you see in this slide. Those are designed to retain body heat. So they actually become quite warm for and the cats love lying on top of them. If you're in extremely cold climate, you can line the walls, the interior walls of the shelter. When you build it, line them with mylar blankets, which are these very thin material that you can easily glue on, and it reflects the body heat back at the cat and makes them warmer that way. Okay, moving along. Let's talk about hostile neighbors. That seem to come up as a concern for a lot of you, understandably. What we recommend, like when we do our basic training, TNR training workshop, is it's always better to try to work with people than it is to argue with them, because arguing with them usually doesn't get you very far. And if people don't want cats in their yards, then it's better just to work with them to have that happen. If they have a normal size backyard, it's not that hard to keep the cats out. Now, if they're on, 2 acres, that's a whole different story. But if you're in an urban area, an urban environment, and or normal, suburban area or a town, usually it's not that hard to keep the cats out of the backyards. You use what we call deterrents. And there are 2 kinds that you see here. One is what we call ultrasonic, and the other is attached to a hose, and it sprays out water. And the way they work is you put them in the ground, and they emit an infrared field that covers the backyard. And when a cat steps into the infrared field, it triggers the device. In the ultrasonic device, it starts to emit a very high-pitched, very annoying to cats sound. People can't hear it, and it doesn't travel through solid objects, so your cats inside aren't going to hear it, or the cats on the other side of the fence aren't going to hear it. And it's just really annoying, and most cats will just leave right away. You do get some cats eventually who are very stubborn, and it may take a week before they are like, it really sucks hanging out here, and they leave. The motion activated sprinkler, on the other hand, when the cat steps in the infrared field, it shoots out a burst of water. It doesn't get the cat wet, but its action is very violent in terms of the burst of water, and it scares the cats. And with both of these devices, what happens is eventually the cats learn the boundaries of the infrared field, and they just stop entering it. They just learn to stay away from it. Now, the motion activated sprinkler, we like that because you can see it working. So there's no mystery to it. The ultrasonic, on the other hand, we can't hear it, so it makes it a little trickier to use properly. And a lot of times people think they don't work, but it's because they didn't set them up properly. So one of your handouts today is how to use an ultrasonic device, and all the pitfalls that are in that. So for example, sometimes people put them up on poles, and then as a result, the infrared field goes shooting over the cat's heads. So they should only be a certain height off of the ground, and you have to point them in the right direction. Just little tricks like that. Also, you have to make sure the size of the infrared field matches the size of the area you're trying to keep cats out of, or you may need more than one of the devices. So that's all in the handout. And here's just a quick graphic of what we're talking about. So this particular ultrasonic device has a range of 25 feet. So a cat entering that 25-foot area is going to trigger it. I mentioned correct range, correct height. You want to make sure it's pointed at an area that's frequently used. You want to make sure you have functioning batteries. Solar devices are great for that. Then you don't have to worry so much about the batteries giving out. And give it some time to work, and again, download the handout for more of these drawings and tips. You can also use physical barriers to deter cats for different areas or from specific places. So just a car cover. If you've got a neighbor who is complaining that the cats are hanging out on top of their car, you might buy him a car cover. And then if the cats go on there, at least they're not touching the vehicle itself. That does require a little bit of taking the cover on and off, but some of them are pretty easy to use. Cat-proof fencing is a very effective way to keep cats in or out of certain areas. They're designed to contain cats, but you can actually point the tops of them in the other direction and they'll keep cats out. It's just an expensive material to use. You can cut down on the cost of cat fencing if there's already like a wooden fence there or something that you can, they have these kind of they're similar to cat fencing, but they are just something that goes on top of existing fences. So they're cheaper and but equally effective. Now, cat scat mats are that little pointy thing you see on the bottom, little plastic points. They don't hurt the cats, but they of course make you put them in the ground with the points sticking skywards. So like a flower bed or a garden or something like that. And the cats are not going to walk on that or dig in that. So it's a very effective way to keep them out of gardens and flower beds. River rocks, you can spread river rocks around a garden, and anything that is obstructing them from digging means they're not going to use it as a litter box. Another idea is just lattice fencing. We've seen people put down 6 foot by 4 foot pieces of lattice or whatever size on the ground, and then plant their flowers in the openings. And again, it will keep the cats out of the garden and for purposes of using it to eliminate. Here's a kind of creative idea we had with somebody who had their car in long-term storage. And since it was sitting there for several months and the cats like to hang out on top of the car, eventually they started scratching and ripping the car cover. So we didn't want them on the car at all. So we covered the top of the car with cat scat mats, as you can see here, and just bungee corded them into place. And the owner was very happy because, their car was completely cat-free while they were away. They're obviously not something you'd want to take on and off on a daily basis, but more of an idea for long-term storage. Another alternative, if the cats are using somebody's garden, or they object to the cats pooping in their yard or whatever it might be, is if you give them a place to go that's more attractive for them. So sandboxes are great for that. And you can just use normal kitty sandbox sand, which is very inexpensive. It's heavy, but it's cheap. And just clean it out. Either throw it all out, replace it every now and then, or scoop it out, whatever it might be. Another thing you can do is put a pile of peat moss in a corner of the yard, and the cats will go use that. They love peat moss for litter. And just, throw it away and replace it every periodically to keep it clean. Another idea is you can get a storage bin, cut a doorway, and put a litter pan inside of the storage bin. And again, the idea is, the cat's got to go somewhere. So if you give them an attractive alternative, they'll usually stay away from the problem areas. Okay, last section I want to talk about today are health hacks. And that's the idea, not to dispense veterinary advice, that's not appropriate, but just basic kind of care or common things that come up that would be very inconvenient or unrealistic or too expensive to be trapping the cats and bringing them into veterinarians. So just some ideas on how to keep your cats healthy. So vitamin C is a big, great nutrient for cats. It bolsters the immune system, especially during times of stress. So trapping or any kind of change that may happen, severe weather. If you boost your cat's immune systems let's say before a trapping, they'll withstand the stress of the whole experience much more. And you can use powdered supplements that you mix into the food, although remember it has a pretty bitter taste, so you can only you have to put in a little bit at a time, but you can give up to 250 milligrams, about an eighth of a teaspoon per cat with each meal, if they'll tolerate it. But a good hack is there's a lot of vitamin C in tomato sauce, and cats usually love tomato sauce. You just have to make sure that the sauce doesn't have any onion in it. Take a good look at the ingredients and don't use it if it's got onion, because onion can cause a lot of health problems for cats. Not so much garlic, but definitely onions. So get them some vitamin C in the very cold parts of the winter. That can also be a good way to go. This is a supplement not a lot of people know about, but it's extremely effective. It's called D-mannose, and it's basically a powder that's a cranberry extract, and it's very good for killing harmful bacteria in the urinary tract. So if you've got cats, especially male cats, and you're concerned that they may be getting to a point where, well, actually you want to prevent blockages. You don't want to wait till a cat once a cat's blocked, they got to get to the vet right away. And the blockage is like a crystal or something forming in their urethra and then preventing them from urinating. So you would want to probably do this as more of a maintenance thing. But we have, with our own pet cats, like we can see that they're starting to touch of blood, or they just look like they're still passing urine, but it looks like they're straining. We'll start to give them the D-mannose right away, and it often clears it up. Again, it's more effective for you as a maintenance dose if you're concerned about the cats, rather than waiting until something happens. Probiotics are another great way to promote health in cats. It's just like with humans, it promotes good bacteria in the intestines, so increases their ability to ingest nutritious nutrients and things like that. If a cats are on antibiotics for any reason, maybe you had to bring one in, or they got a shot of convenia, and then you release them, the probiotics will help replenish the intestinal bacteria that the antibiotics may have killed. And you can add them to food or water, about 1/4 of a teaspoon daily. There's an example of one that you can get on Amazon on this slide, but if you do a little research, you'll see there's just tons of probiotics out there. What about fleas? well, we come back to our friend diatomaceous earth, which will kill fleas because of it's, as I said before, it's actually very sharp on a microscopic level, and it will kill fleas on contact usually. So what you would want to do if you're having flea problems in an area, and again, remember you're wearing a dust mask, it won't get into the cat's lungs as long as they're not around while you're spreading it. The danger of ingesting it in your lungs is during the spreading, not when it's already in the ground or on the ground. So you put it in cracks and crevices, anywhere that fleas may gather. And people often actually dust the cats with it. You know, though, if you're able to handle them, you can. You know, I'd rather use a standard flea medication, but you know, sometimes this is much more a lot cheaper, and you can just take it and kind of rub it on the cat's fur, and that will kill whatever fleas are in contact. And again, if they lick it and it's food grade, it's not going to harm them. Beneficial nematodes are these microscopic organisms like worms, and you literally spray them on the grass, and you have to do it in the shade, not during the heat of the day, otherwise you'll kill them right away. But you know, you spray them at dawn under the shade of a tree, and they just start growing like crazy and spreading all over the lawn, eating all the flea larvae that are there, and they will pretty quickly eliminate. You know, the adult fleas will go through their life cycle, which is a few weeks, and then there won't be any larvae left to have more fleas. You can get over-the-counter medication for fleas, and as I say, you can get the standard if you can handle the cats, and you can get Advantage or Frontline and squeeze the tube on in between their shoulder blades. But of course, for a lot of these community cats, you can't do that. So assuming you can't handle them, Capstar is a medication that you can put in their food, and it will kill all the fleas on them within 30 minutes, usually faster. And you don't need a prescription for it. You can get it over the counter. You do have to be careful that you don't one pill for each cat. So you might not be able to dose them all at once. Just keep track of who you have. And it won't kill larvae or eggs. So it's not like Advantage where it continues to work for like a month. It's like 10 minutes, it kills all the fleas on them, and then it's done. But let's say you're going to do a trapping and you're going to bring some of the cats in your house to hold them temporarily. Maybe you want to kill all the fleas ahead of time. Safe for kittens over 2 pounds. And one tip is the active ingredient is nitin pyrum. And there are generic versions, and I put a link to one on there, that are usually 25, 35% cheaper than the name brand, which is Capstar. For worms, there's a few things you can put in their food. Drontal, that you can get over the counter. You can get Drontal. There's a tapeworm medication that you see there. These are both from Pet Meds, and you can go the holistic route and get something like Homeopet. And what the homeopathic treatments do is they don't kill the worms, but they cause the cats to excrete them, and then the worms die upon being outside of the cat's body. Okay, want to let you, for those of you who have not taken our certification workshop or might be interested, the next one is going to be on Saturday, December 7th. That's where we do basic training on trapping, and you want to make sure your colony cats are fixed. So we go through, this is a very detailed workshop on how to make that happen. $10, and you can register at the link there. Also want to make you aware that coming up in January is the annual online cat conference held by the Community Cats podcast. It's a great conference, takes place over 2 days. There's just a ton of information. And there's an early bird special until December 27th. I'll be speaking at the conference, a workshop called Globe-Trotting with Neighborhood Cats. In the last couple of years, we've started working with programs all over the world. Right now, we're in Australia, Indonesia, and Kenya. And so we'll be talking about those programs and kind of the interesting differences and similarities to programs here in North America. And with that, Stacy, I think we have a little bit of time for questions.
Excellent. Super. Great presentation. And I was just keeping an eye on the questions. One person was asking questions if there's, anything special or anything different that they need to do when they're caring for mom cat and kittens. Is there anything different when you're talking about, kittens under the age of 12 weeks?
So I assume caring for them outdoors as community cats. I would just up the nutrition that you're giving the mom. That's the best thing. So even if it's for a couple of months, try to give her extra canned food. Try to, if whatever you can afford in terms of the quality of that food. But she's going to be using a lot of energy and nutrients and a lot of strain on her system. So the better the nutrition during that period of time, the healthier she'll be, and then the healthier her kittens will be. I'd also be conscious of whether there's any flea issues, especially when they're very young. Kittens, if they get infested with fleas, they can become anemic, and that can be fatal. So you'd want to think about, dusting any areas where mom is keeping the kittens and make sure they're flea free.
Got you. Somebody was just asking about L-lysine, and for me, olden times, L-lysine used to be like, oh, this is the thing we use all the time. What are your opinions about using that?
Yeah, it has antiviral qualities. It's not the cure-all that sometimes people think it is, but it's helpful. So if you've got a cat with an upper respiratory infection, something that's viral, probably viral in nature, and it's not too severe. If it gets severe, you want to bring them to a veterinarian. But if it's mild, you might mix a little bit of lysine. You'll have to do some research on what the dosage should be, and it will help. It's not a cure, but I have found that it's helpful. It gives the system a little bit of a more resistance.
There's a question out here with regards to feline leukemia positive cat, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to recommend that they check out some of our videos on the YouTube page with regards to feline leukemia from Online Feline Leukemia Day. And there's also, if you just Google in Facebook, there's a very strong feline leukemia Facebook group in there. Or you can always email me and I can put you in touch with Margaret Tompkins, and she's a wealth of information when you're talking about dealing with cats with feline leukemia. All right, let me, in terms of community cat colony relocation, I'm going to highly recommend you go to your handouts. You download those handouts and look in the TNR handbook. I would assume relocation. I know relocation is addressed. There's a chapter in there, so I would recommend. It's a bigger conversation than what we can do in 60 seconds. So I'm going to just refer you to your handouts on that one. And let's see here. Questions are coming in fast and furious. Okay, what if you have a disease outbreak in your colony? Do you need to know what disease, or are you okay just being kind of general here?
Well, usually, disease is, in our experience, it's directly related to the conditions that the colony is living in. So it's usually indicative of poor nutrition, or lack of adequate shelter. So the first thing you'd want to do is address those. You'd want to make sure if it's cold or you're in a very rainy climate or whatever, that they have a place to shelter that's protected from the elements. I'd want to immediately, even on a temporary couple of week basis, start to raise the level of nutrition that they're getting and see if they can handle it for themselves. Because in colony situations, disease is usually a symptom of something that could be improved in the colony management. If it's beyond that, then you really need to get veterinary advice.
Mm-hmm. Yep. There's someone here who's referring to dealing with feline coronavirus in the colony. I don't know what is feline coronavirus?
Well, coronaviruses could be upper respiratory, they could be COVID-19. I mean, there's a whole
A
range
line of
of,
them. But
yeah, I mean, most coronaviruses are cold, you're probably talking upper respiratory infections. So when it comes to cats, it's a viral thing. So again, you want to treat it with vitamin C, with better food, making sure that they have a warm, dry place to sleep. If it gets really severe, you may need to consult a veterinarian so they can get antibiotics to protect against secondary bacterial infections. But it's viral. Coronaviruses obviously are viral in nature. Most coronaviruses are not much more than a cold, but they can get pretty serious.
right. So I caught lots of conversation about yeah, somebody's mentioning FIP and all the changing in the treatment there, not to be gone into today, but hang in there. 2025, we will be dealing with FIP, but there is a lot of new medical information out about FIP, feline infectious peritonitis, for those of you who don't know. Last question is, how do you convince the community that Trap-Neuter-Return is really a positive thing? It seems like there's, a lot of like, I have to work really hard to convince people, or I'm not able to convince my neighbors that, it's okay to have these cats out in the general population. So what would your recommendations be to try and turn the tide?
Well, I mean, you started the process by talking to people in the community and trying to educate them. So having that dialogue is really important. And really the best, most persuasive is a successful example, right? So when we started in the Upper West Side of Manhattan, TNR was completely unknown. But there were colonies of cats everywhere and people were having a lot of problems. Remember, TNR is most effective as a problem solver. So you've got cats screeching in the middle of the night, waking people up. You've got male cats spraying the backyards, and that smells so noxious people can't use their backyards. You got kittens all over the place. You have deaths that are highly visible. So you want to come in as a problem solver and say, hey, if I do TNR, these problems are going to go away. Almost entirely. And we did that in one colony. It took one colony of cats, and then we spent the next 2 years TNRing all over the Upper West Side because everybody wanted the same solution to the same problems that they were having. So I think approaching it as this is what it will do for you, not so much like, oh, we love the cats and aren't the cats great, but this is to your advantage, whether you like the cats or not. There's a reason we fix our pet cats, because otherwise they would be nightmares to live with, and they're nightmares to live with outdoors when they're not fixed. So talk about the advantages to the people. Nobody else is going to come along and help you.
Right.
You may want them to disappear. That's not going to happen. So let's get them fixed and at least greatly reduce the issues that you're having.
Yeah, right.
And
Exactly.
Here's an example of where it worked.
Yeah, right. I have not run into any or many situations where all the cats have been spayed or neutered, the colony is at 100% sterilization, and that there have been complaints in the immediate vicinity of those cats. So the issues that people are dealing with issues when the cats are not all fully
Right.
spayed or neutered. So our energy and our resources needs to be getting to that 100% sterilization point and providing appropriate housing, appropriate food, you know, just have it make sense for the community that you're in. And then everybody will be fine, I think.
Yeah, I mean, it's really important to understand, to not lose perspective, which is people don't have the knowledge about cats that we have. And but by we, I mean everybody who's attending today. They just see cats. They don't know sterilized cat from unsterilized cat, nuisance from non-nuisance. They don't know that fixing them is going to make a difference. They just see cats, they see problems, they don't want the cats, they don't want. So you're the one who has to explain to them, no, it's the cat's status, it's the fact that they're not spayed or neutered. That's the problem, right? I mean, once they're fixed and you've eliminated most of these problems, the cats become a benefit. I mean, at our build, we're close to the water here in Maui. We don't spend a dime. My association doesn't spend a dime on rodent control, right? Because the cats take care of it, and they're all fixed. And so, you know, it can become an advantageous situation. But just understand that people don't know that. They don't see that. You have to be the one to explain it to them.
Yep. So we're a little bit over time, so thank you for hanging out a little bit extra. For those that have been hanging out for the extra time, here's a little extra tip. It's a big benefit for you. If you'd like to continue your education here with the Community Cats podcast, we actually have some scholarship opportunities, and I'm going to ask Kristen out there to send the link to our scholarship page. You can check that page periodically as we have different scholarship opportunities become apparent. We put them out there, but right now we have scholarship opportunities for the online cat conference, as well as also for the surrender prevention certification workshop in January and our return to home certification workshop in March. However, the scholarships are very limited. So this is an early warning. So if you're interested in taking advantage of scholarships, I would highly recommend you get your application in now rather than waiting, because it's going to close probably within the next couple of weeks. So it's not a secret, but we want to get the word out now, and it's an opportunity as a thank you for those of you who have been here for 2 hours and have been listening to this great presentation that Brian and Susie in the background. Thank you so much for answering questions. Kristen, the technical tabby, thank you for that. And everybody, thank you for turning your passion for cats into action.